We're live.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the May 9th Finance Committee meeting. Our board chair, Mark Bialik, is traveling tonight, so I am Denise Brooks, serving as committee chair tonight. Before we get to our agenda, please let's go around the room and share who's here.
Robert Frazier, Superintendent.
Rich Dyer from the Selzer Company.
Mary McKee, School Board.
Ed Tate, School Board.
Kevin Cartlock of Cornerstone.
Joe Hidalgo, School Board.
Ed Stallo, the School Board.
Matt Federson, IT Director.
Bill Stone, Director of Business Administration.
Great. Let's start with our first agenda item.
Okay, so thank you, Ms. Brooks. We have two visitors this evening. We have Kevin Carput from Cornerstone, who's going to give us our quarterly cash management update. And we also have Rich Dyer, who's our insurance broker. He and I are going to talk about our upcoming insurance renewal. Then we have some board agenda items culminating in a final budget discussion. So I will turn it over to Kevin.
Excellent. Well, when cash management's the most exciting thing on an agenda, you know you have a rock'em sock'em type of meeting. Well, thank you all, and I appreciate being invited down. I do have some hard copies if anybody would want those. But really, you know, all the news tonight is good. If you've been watching the stock market over the past couple of days, it's obviously been fairly rocky. But in this cash management account, that doesn't really affect anything. So when you hear on the news that the market's bad, we're fairly insulated from that. But I think on the first page here, what we want to look at is just, this is the Treasury Yield curve. Just to remind everybody, that's basically when you look at the different time frames from 1 month out of 30 years, that's how much interest you would collect by buying bond out that far. But the really noticeable thing is if you look at the blue line compared to the green and tan lines, how much the yield curve has flattened. Meaning the Federal Reserve has been raising short-term interest rates, but the rest of the yield curve hasn't been moving up. And there are a lot of reasons why that happens, but the real benefit here is that in our cash, we actually now have a positive real return, which means when you take out inflation, inflation's really bad, it just eats away at returns. Our yield on our cash is actually above inflation, so we're creating value for the district with what we're doing here. I would say that we are, if you listen to the Federal Reserve, they say they're data dependent. I think Cornerstone is equally data dependent because what the Fed is saying, the market thinks the Fed is actually going to cut rates later this year. That means our cash yields would drop. But I had a call with a money manager we really respect who said they think the Fed is going to raise rates 25 basis points this year. So what we're going to do is play it down the middle for now. There are different techniques we have that if we think the Fed is going to raise rates, we can buy longer bonds, lock in a higher interest rate. If it turns out that the Fed looks like they're going to raise interest rates, we have ways to invest to that and benefit there. And that part of that is that, you know, we've had the board approved a Stonecastle account, which is an overnight FDIC deposit. That is a complement to the Wilmington Trust portfolio. So we're excited to be able to utilize that as the interest rate scenario becomes a little bit more clear in our view. If you look at asset location, this is really an eye chart. So you know, I'll just point you down to the bottom of the page where you can see the year-to-date, the fiscal year-to-date income coming from the various sources, and you see the general fund with a quarter to go in the fiscal year has earned $1.77 million of interest. Just to remind those of you who may have forgotten, it wasn't that long ago that number for an entire year was about $400,000. So, and it isn't like we have more money now to invest. And then we do break out the bond proceeds, interest, and the aggregate relationship is about $2.25 million of interest year to date. I would note that those two numbers don't add up because we drop out the miscellaneous funds, the Turk fund, and from the total.
And Kevin, if I can interrupt it quickly,
Yes, sir.
our budget for the entire year was 1.25 million. So we are $500,000 over budget. So we've made an adjustment for the next year's budget to add some revenue.
But we just talked about setting expectations. Oh, Bill, what are you doing? But and granted, interest rates have moved up, and it's absolutely prudent to build in the more income off of there. And I will end with this chart. There is information about the holdings. Everything is within compliance with Act 10 and our investment policy statement, which is actually more restrictive than Act 10. And just point out the quarterly performance, and what you see here is that gray box is all of the different money market funds available to an investor. So that's a peer group. And then you can see the green letter A is the Pliget portfolio. The tan letter B is the TD, the overnight cash account. The blue letter C is the the First National Bank of Newtown. And the orange letter D is the Wilmington Trust portfolio. So what you see next to the letters are the returns for different periods. So you see last quarter, Wilmington Trust returned 0.7%, Pliget returned 0.5%, TD returned 0.5%, just a little bit below. But what's important to us is when you look at the right side, so throw those numbers away for a second, and the numbers in parentheses are the peer group ranking. So net of fees, how are these managers doing compared to the peer group, which is our other options? And you can see that Wilmington Trust was at the top of the peer group, Pliget wasn't too far behind, and TD is kind of hanging around in the middle over the longer period. Next quarter, now that we have 3 years of data, we'll be able to provide some more risk statistics around this, but overall things are going as well as we could expect, and we certainly 3 years ago wouldn't have predicted that we would have this kind of income spinning off the portfolio. So we're quite pleased with the positioning, and the next step will be sitting with Bill and Gail to figure out next year's cash flows and see how we can optimize that. So with that, are there any thoughts or questions?
Do you have the screen for the collateral?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of stood out to me to the loans. I was wondering why the par values were so much lower than the original amount versus the credit cards.
Yeah, so that is because the credit card ones are newer, and as much as the press says nobody ever pays off their school loans, that is reflecting the fact that they're paying off.
Okay, so that's good.
Yeah,
Thanks, guys.
And just to be on the record for this, we do look at that collateral all the time, and we've diversified some of the risk away, but it's something we keep an eye on. That par amount, when you see that par or the current value below the par, it first makes you think, oh, yeah, and a good one. All right.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we move on to the insurance items, I just want to announce that Kristen Marcel and Mike Thorwart have joined the board table.
All right, so I just need to steal back the clicker for Kevin before we ready for dinner.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so next on our agenda is an update on the insurance renewal process. So this is in preparation for the actual recommendation for the approval of our insurances, which will happen next month. So we wanted to set the stage for the board, let you know what the process looks like, show you the current state of where we are with our current policies, so that you're prepared when we make the recommendation for approval next month. So this is just an informational item at this time. So Rich and I are going to tag team this. I'm going to go over our current state, which is the slide you're seeing up there, and then he's going to talk about the state of the market and what the renewal process is going to look like. So on the screen here, you can see a summary of our insurances by policy. So down the list, you see the carrier, the premium amount, and then just any pertinent notes. So let me highlight a couple of key points. Most of our insurances are carried by CM Regent, which is the provider for the PSBA program. So they're carrying, I'd say 75% of all of our coverage. Our largest expense is workers' compensation, which is probably not surprising given that we are a people organization. I just want to point out our experience mod factor, which is this figure down at the bottom here. It's increasing, but I don't want that to be a misrepresentation of what our trend is in workers' comp. That modification factor is calculated based on the prior 3 full years of experience. And right now we've got a pretty ugly year sitting in that experience mod factor. So when we reset for this year, we dropped out a really good year and we added a year that was not as good. So we're gonna carry that year, which is right in the middle, for another 2 years. So our claims have been dropping over the last 3 years, but we won't pick those up for another couple of years. So we're hopeful that this number is going to increase, but then we're going to see it come back down if we can maintain that trend of lower claims. Let's see, next, property. So that's the line at the very top here. So that's basically coverage for our buildings. Now we have what's called blanket limit, which means that each building is valued individually, but then our insurance covers the entirety of the district. So even if we have a loss that maybe is higher than the value on a particular building, we have coverage because we can steal it from other places. So that's a positive for us. The school leaders insurance really kind of covers us if there's any sort of failure to educate in the special education realm. And I was happy to see that we have separate cyber liability coverage. As most of you, I'm sure have heard, that's an area of risk, and it's nice to see that we have some separate coverage there. It's one that Rich and I have talked about evaluating more, given how that is changing so continuously. So, Rich, the show is yours to set the stage for our renewal process.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Thank you for having me here. Appreciate it, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to serve as your insurance broker for the property casualty insurance. Thank you. Obviously you pay over $1.1 million in premium. So what we do is there's a process, a renewal process. So part of the process is filling out all kinds of applications. There's been a number of insurance companies that have gone and done inspections to look at facilities, and basically we put a submission together to make you, which you are, a first-class school district. So with that, there's really 2 portions. We look at the package, which is most of the policies outside of the workers' comp, and then the workers' comp, there's some carriers that write workers' comp. So there's 5 very strong carriers with regard to the public schools. So we've gone to those carriers. We're expecting to get 3 quotes back on the package. Okay, on the workers' comp, we've gone to about 7 carriers, and we're hoping to get 4 or 5 quotes back. So obviously the workers' comp, $600,000. We're hoping with the mod going up, albeit the experience has been good the past 2 years. 3 years ago, there was a spike. The current carrier was not involved with that spike, so we're hoping, good things from that. But what are they looking at? They're going to look at your loss ratio. Okay, they're going to look at your 4 to 5 year claims history, evaluate that. Past experience is an indicator of the future. So each one of the carriers is going to take a different stance. So one of the things that we're going to do is explore different options too. So we're going to sit down with Bill probably at the end of May, and we're going to explore different limit options, deductible options. You were on previously with PMA, retrospectively rated program. You get money back and you pay more. Right now you're with CM Regent on the workers' comp, and it's a guaranteed cost plan, so it's fixed. So when we sit down with Bill, we'll lay it all out. Nothing will be shorted. Do a very thorough coverage analysis to make sure anybody new coming in is not coming in with a great premium, but reduced coverages, limits, or raise in deductibles. So we'll do a full analysis. of that. But one of the things that I wanted to discuss just briefly is, you're looking at premiums of $1.1 million. So that's really, that's what you pay out of pocket. But there really is, and our efforts at the Selger Company, we're aiming to reduce the true cost of risk, okay, which is really the claims. Your claims drive this premium up. You have bad claims. If you have $1 million in claims, I'll guarantee you're not paying $1 million in premium, paying $2 million in premium. So what we want to do, and we've started over the last 3 or 4 months, we started gathering a lot of information we have our own in-house risk control people that will work with your human resources. We've met with Christine and Doug in property services, work together and with Bill, and work together to analyze your claims and determine areas where we think there can be improvement. And at this point, after all the analysis, we've kind of zoned in on slips and falls. That's making up over the past 2 years, 51% of your claims. So with that, well, how do we improve that? So we try to determine what the root cause of those claims are. Where are they happening? Who are they happening to? What type of footwear are they wearing when it happens? What type of surfaces is it happening on? So a lot of that, drills all the way down to the person filling out the report. So what we're going to do is work together with human resources and property services to try to drill down and identify some of those root causes and have an impact. So that's what our goal is. We'd also, on the back end, you have claims, so we want to be an advocate for you, especially in the more serious claims, to resolve those claims as quickly as possible. One of the hidden costs of claims is loss of productivity. You get a teacher injured, and you know what that process is like if the teacher's out just because they slipped and fell. You got the substitute teacher. There's a lot that goes with that type of claim. So to reduce those situations and reduce that loss of productivity is important. And the other thing, the carriers are going to come out with premiums, but what type of resources are they going to bring to the table also? So, you want to match up or improve resources that you have, whether it be educational or training, risk control, inspections. So if there were to be a change, it's not just the premium thing, but what do they bring to the table for Council Rock School District? So that will be evaluated also. So with that, we're hoping for a good result. A state of the market, I would say, you all heard about the wildfires over the last couple of years. So the property is trending up. Property premiums are trending up. And the other thing, it doesn't affect you as much. The automobile is a market that's hardening, mostly because of people texting and distracted driving. In addition to all of our bumpers that have cameras in them now, well, a bumper that used to cost $1,000 to repair costs $4,000. So that's driving the market up. So that's all I have. Anybody have any questions for me?
The evaluation process you spoke about, when do you expect to have the results of that process?
We'll sit down with Bill at the end of the month. It started about 60 days ago, so we're starting to get quotes in. So there's some ancillary policies that we're also working on that may take a little bit longer. But I would say by the 3rd or 4th week of May, we'll have everything in front of Bill to evaluate.
And I'll bring a recommendation for actual selections and premium amounts in June. Thank you.
Is this like the same thing as my house? Like, this is your quote for your auto, this is your quote for your house, this is your umbrella, whatever. But if you get all 3, you get like a discount. So when this gets, out for bid, is it the same thing? Like, these are what the costs are, but if we bundle things together, then you reap more savings?
I can say this, yes, to some carriers will look at it like that. Other carriers won't. So it's kind of a mixed bag, not necessarily. But some carriers, they don't like workers' comp. They'll shy away from it. But they'll really want to do the package. And a couple of carriers already said, hey, we'll quote the package, your property, your liability, and your automobile. We don't want to get involved for workers' comp. That's why we sometimes mix and match, and that's why there's more carriers the more carriage interest in your workers' comp, a lot of that has to do with the size of the premium. So,
Right,
but
so then
it's
they,
very similar.
so they submit it both ways.
Yes, yes.
And because I know for my house, let's just say, you know, I ended up changing insurance carriers because the overall price was lower for me, even though I was paying actually a lot more on my auto, but the total, right? So they put it out, they itemize it
Mhm.
separately, but then tell you what you could get
Yes.
packaged.
But I would agree in general with commercial insurance, it is very similar. The size of your premiums just depends.
Right, I understand.
Other options.
Heard you say, Bill, that you're taking a look at the level of coverage on the cyber liability. I assume you're looking at the level of coverage on each one of the separate insurance policies. You know, property, accident, they're all being given a fresh look. Great.
Yeah, we recently did go through the property schedule. There is some variation between some of the appraisal limits, so that's something we're going through the process of looking at. Particularly in a property bill niche, you do have blankets, so that's a nice protector.
Yeah.
If, you know, if one of the high schools goes down, instead of it being $100 million to $130 million, you still would have that protection.
So we won't be overinsured.
I think you can answer this, but I've been asking a lot of questions to ensure that we're not over.
Great, great.
Or underinsured.
I had a couple of questions. I brought up, what you just said about blanket coverage, is that the excess liability with the limit of 20 million umbrella, or is that something different?
Well, it's very similar. There's blanket on the property, but the excess liability would sit over a number of different policies. It would be bumping up. So you can see the excess liability says 20 million. So that sits over top of your general liability, your automobile liability, and your school leaders legal liability.
Okay.
So it acts like a blanket, but we would call it an excess liability, or another common term is an umbrella.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you doing the analysis, and the 51% that you came up with for slips and falls is interesting to me. I was wondering if there was a clear second and third category.
Yes, there was. In terms of number of
Yeah.
claims, it would be, it's definitely, the category is definitely teachers. And, you know, there are incidents in the classroom and outside of the classroom. Some of the outside of the classroom or out on the playground, where a teacher might get struck. Some incidents inside the classroom are dealing with students. So that would be the clear number two.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other board questions? Are there any questions from the public?
You know, you mentioned that you analyzed the claims from Council Rock School District in particular. Are there any things to gain from other school districts and looking across districts in the Pennsylvania area?
In terms of benchmarking? Yeah. Well, we're kind of in the infancy stage of it, but I think there probably would be a common thread of slip and falls, but certainly we will benchmark it.
Thank you so much for coming. I feel like I should make a little plug, because for the 6 years that I was on the board, Mark Bialik had asked for a review of our brokers and RFP process. So we had the same broker for a long time. So it's very nice to have you here and know that we're getting a look at this maybe with a very different lens than we have the last few years. So we're looking forward to seeing what you bring to us.
And we're excited to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rich.
So let's move on to our board agenda items for May 30th. So the first item is our recommendation to approve a food service management company contract. So we had to undertake a very highly regulated, detailed process through the PDE. And when I say highly regulated, we were not allowed to change things in the RFP except where PDE said you were allowed to put your numbers in. So it was rigorous for sure, and it's frankly not even something that we give to Rob Cox's office to review, because there's no changes that he can recommend because PD won't approve them. However, I did put on here where we could enter the respective weights that we would assign to each of the categories for evaluation. So you can see how we were going to evaluate our RFPs. What we're required to ask for is a 1-year contract with 4 option years. So right now with Chartwell, we are in the last year of our current 1 + 4-year deal. So at the end of this year, we have to go out and do this RFP process. So that's why we're here tonight. So this is the same process now. So we have the option to turn this from a 1-year contract into a 5-year contract if the board were so inclined. So each year around this time, I'll be bringing back a recommendation whether to renew or whether we'll go back through this process again. So we opened these RFPs on April the 11th, and we had 3 companies attend the pre-bid meeting and toured 2 of our cafeterias. And then we had 2 vendors submit proposals. So the incumbent is Chartwell's, and then we had a proposal from Mets. So I did not list each of the evaluation criteria on this slide because for the most part, these companies were pretty similar in those areas. They were rated pretty close. But these 4 were the areas where we saw some distinction. So in terms of cost, Chartwell, as you can see, their management fees are higher, $245,000 versus $120,000 for Mets. But there's a significant difference in the amount of rebates. So these are when they purchase food, we're required to receive those rebates back. So if they buy something for $1 and get a 50-cent rebate on it, then we are entitled to get that 50 cents back. So because Chartwell ultimately rolls up into a company known as the Compass Group, it's the largest food service company in the world. They get about 18% rebates on their food purchases. So they far and away exceeded the rebates that Mets was able to offer, which brought the net cost down to $3.45 million versus about $3.6 million. So a competitive process, but you can see that the real difference here was the rebates that Chartwell's was able to offer. Obviously, in terms of experience and references, Chartwell's is approaching 30 years of food service in Council Rock, so they have a clear edge in that realm. Mets does service some school districts in this area, Morrisville Borough and Jenkintown, so smaller districts, but many of their clients are out in the western part of the state, so they have less experience here. And then finally, the guarantee. So this means that the company is guaranteeing a return to the school district of at least those dollars. So for Chartwell's, $235,000 versus Mets, $175,000.
For the first year, right?
That's for all. That's for all. Well, so that's if we choose to renew, that guarantee carries into the other years.
Okay.
So Chartwell's number is equal to the contribution that the school district would have to make to subsidize the free and reduced lunch students at the 2 high schools. So that's how that number was calculated. I view the guarantee as a partnership rather than leverage. So to me, that means that Chartwell's has to write us a check for that amount, regardless of their operating performance. However, if we don't help them ensure that participation is good, that we give them opportunities to generate revenue, then our service levels in the cafeterias are going to suffer. So this is nice to have as a backstop to ensure that there is some financial coverage, but we're going to partner with Chartwell's to make sure that this is not at the expense of making sure that kids can get through the line in a timely manner and that the right food is being served. And if we need to get creative about how the program has to operate, we will do that to make sure that we work together to make that guarantee as seamless as possible. So as you can see, our recommendation is to approve a contract with Chartwell's. We bring that forward to you for May 30th. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Does anybody taste the food?
During the RFP process? No, we did not do any taste testing during the RFP.
I have 3 kids that refuse to eat the Chartwell's food. Refuse. First grader will not eat their lunch. 4th grader will not eat their lunch. The 11th grader is eating junk. I'm all for saving money, but the food's lousy.
So we have an advisory committee of parents, administrators, students. So we are constantly trying to fight both the stigma of the school lunch program as well as
manage the mass production versus scratch cooking, that, you know, we're trying to move more towards that healthier healthier options versus the pre-prepared foods. But it's a challenge. There's no doubt that to get the food out in the time that we have to do that, there's got to be some element of pre-processed and pre-prepared. But we have to find the balance so that kids will eat.
But also, I mean, there are certain guidelines that the government
Indeed.
mandates, and I hate when I give examples that show how old I am, but when my kids were in school, not some of these restrictions weren't in place. They loved buying lunch, and then, you know, these things come in because we need more whole grains. We can't have fried food, and so not that I'm endorsing that, but you know, the lunch program participation showed some decline when that happened. So I don't disagree with you, but I think there's some limitations that would exist regardless because of these guidelines. The other thing I would just like to offer is 5 years ago when we went through this process, Cartwell's was the only bidder. And so, I mean, I remember having these conversations, we're asking these things, and I'm like thinking in my head, well, we don't really have a choice anyway, right? But nonetheless, they took it really seriously. Chartwell's has been to many meetings. We've talked about these things. It's been a little while, so maybe we could do it again. But this comforts me because to be able to see a comparison bid, just to basically know, not that I didn't think so, but just really see it, that what they're offering is in line.
But I'm going to counter that. If Bill just said that they have, the other company offers something in Morrisville, to me, due diligence would be to check out their operation, check what offerings they're offering, and see if it's something in a different quality, so to speak, that fits the guidelines. That would be something worth looking at. It's easy to continue down the same road. I mean, I'm not going to go to the same restaurant if it's not good. Then my question would be, what do the numbers look like over the last couple of years with people that are buying lunches? And we see the decline. And is it based on the quality as opposed to the necessary offerings?
Yeah, so I can
I
get.
mean, it's easy to sit here and eat out. When you have a first grader telling you the food is not good and she eats things, to me, we have an opportunity to maybe offer something with a close proximity to another school district, at least look at the operation. I think we're selling ourselves a little short.
I would say the first thing that I would want to do in that analysis is see what districts are working with. Because if they're all the Jenkintown's and the Morrisfields, I mean, those are tiny, tiny school districts. The scale of
And I agree
this,
with that.
yeah, so I would
That's your
say,
competition though.
even if they are successful in those districts, and that's new, but if they are successful, what's their plan? And even if they have a plan, will they be able to execute a plan to take it to scale across 14 schools?
And again, I'm not going to keep beating this up, but you're showing me two possibilities here. So they must have rose to that level for us to be looking at. So for us, I would have blown out the water saying they can't meet our needs.
These are what the proposals provided. So although we did not include any taste tests, I mean, we did have lots of information about what they serve. And there were, you know, when you're talking about scale for mass production of food, which is what it is. I mean, we have to serve a lot of kids every day in a really short period of time. They were pretty well even in terms of what they could offer in terms of quality. I mean, we're seeing things in here, you know, scratch cooking, lots of new and innovative ways to try to work within that box. And so it's, I'm happy to pass this around. These are the RFPs that we brought in. But we can certainly arrange to go check out Morrisville and see what it looks like. But it is really, to Dr. Fraser's point, it's a different level of scale, and knowing that Chartwell's has the experience to be able to get the kids fed, that's a big difference for us.
Can I piggyback on that? When I asked my kids what they think of the food, because last year we had some chefs come in from different places and we were reviewing it. You get items that they like and items that they don't like. It's not just across the board that they don't like anything. They like the chicken nuggets and maybe some of this other items. Maybe perhaps we could do some kind of student survey of, even if it's simple, depending on what grade they're on, but we should look at maybe using some of this feedback from the actual students on a broader base to give feedback to Cartwell if they're going to continue to be because the guy was open to it. The other thing I would say was last year when he was here, we talked about the high school opting out of the program, right? So that we could be profitable because more kids eat the food when you're able to go beyond the guidelines. So we're not looking to do that. We lose free and reduced lunch, but now they're covering that, right? Is that what they're
So the
covering?
high schools are not in the National School Lunch Program, so they do not have to follow the federal regulations, but you still have the perception balance of, we can't just serve all the junk food that we want because we know it's going to sell. We still have to be able to offer, healthy alternatives, just as it's a moral imperative.
And educate the kids about nutrition.
Right, making more choices, absolutely.
So the last point would be,
Well, I was just gonna add that my daughter does buy lunch every day, and and obviously, like, her situation is different, and there's so many students we're trying to think about. But she does buy lunch, and it's actually helped, like, expand what she will eat because she has been a picky eater. And so we've had a good experience, and they have different options, so she doesn't like the one thing, she can get something else. And so we've had actually a really good experience. But perhaps it's worth looking at this committee and seeing if there's some way that we can, I think a partnership seems like it's strong and the numbers are good, but maybe it's a matter of trying to, look at that committee process or seeing if there's a way to improve the quality or, do a survey. I don't know if this with kids, but, just trying to see if there's a way to refresh or, think about it in a different way. But we've had a good experience at Brightstown, but I don't know. I'm sure there are other parents that, have different scenarios and different things that they do.
I was going to make that suggestion based on Ed's input and Joe's questions and so forth. Point out that this is a one-year contract, so we could, over the coming months, take a look at the lunch program. Anybody who's interested, participating in that process. But we're looking at a one-year contract, so if we come up with different options, then that's a possibility.
I'd be interested, we'll take this back to buildings, so in alternate bids where we didn't participate in the National School Lunch Program. What would that do to these numbers? We don't have to.
Right.
We do not have to participate and be regulated if we don't want to, and it's up to us. We can still provide free lunches, but it would be interesting to see what that dollar figure is if Chartwell's didn't have to be regulated. Now, I don't know what that does to food quality. I'm not going, but we don't need to participate in a lot of these onerous regulations here if we don't want to. We don't in the high schools.
Bill, I did remember what I wanted to come back to. Last year, we talked about participation rates at the secondary and elementary school, and I was wondering if we had data yet, or are we waiting?
I'm gonna get some data for you and send it out. I don't have anything.
Thanks.
Hearing no other questions, we're gonna, our recommendation is to move this to the agenda for May 30th, but I will certainly follow up with some of that information, and we will begin the process of using that Food Service Advisory Committee to relay your feedback and to try to work towards better quality at still a good cost.
And because we might have a degree of dissent on this item, we'll do this as an action item as opposed to consent agenda.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, so we have a couple other agenda items here. So this next item, the contract with ALC for supplemental transportation. So before I go into the details of that, I just want to share that we've done our legal review on our end. It's now back in ALC's hands. I did not get back comments from their folks yet. So I'm optimistic that we'll get them back before May 30th and that the board will have an opportunity to look at the contract before they have to approve it. But if this has to go onto the June agenda, it may end up there. I'll certainly keep you apprised of that. So as you've all heard regarding transportation, we're going more places with our students. We have more obligations as far as transportation goes, and we need more options to get our kiddos to where they need to be as efficiently and as cost effectively as possible. So our goal is obviously to be able to service every child that we have with either an in-house run or with first student, the majority of our transportation. The ALC company provides a model that could be in certain circumstances a little bit cheaper than either first student or the IU, and certainly more flexible around the minimums. So for example, first student has a 2-hour minimum. So if we have a run that's just around the corner, but we can't service it with either our vans or with a first student van, and it's only going to be billed for half an hour, we could use ALC's model for this. So it's really another company to have in our arsenal to be able to make sure that we're providing the best service possible. So as I said, we'll either bring this contract back to you for May 30th or June 20th, but it's really, we may not use ALC at all, or we may use them significantly as we need to for some of those runs on the periphery of our service. We're looking for your approval to put that in our back pocket if we need it.
So they don't have minimums?
No, they do not.
Is that going to be over and above first student, where the first student can't handle it, or just mostly those auxiliary ones that are outside of the area?
So right now we're going to the Bucks IU for that, and even they're starting to have a little trouble servicing some of these runs. So it's really more of a just make sure we have somebody who's ready for next school year in the event that we need to.
What type of fleet? Was it like small buses?
Yeah, small buses,
Not large, full-scale school buses?
No, we wouldn't need to use those.
Who certifies student carriers? The PennDOT, State Department of Education?
So there are requirements from both PDE around the drivers and the process.
Okay.
And then PennDOT certifies the actual vehicle, so it's kind of a dual
Good.
process. Any other questions on ALC? Hearing none. We have 3 bids for your approval on May 30th. We have the phys ed bid, phys ed supplies. That came in at $32,860. That's about $9,400 more than last year. Just for comparison, it's about $2,500 over 2 years ago. The reason for the increase is we're looking to replace some volleyball standards and nets and padding at Council Rock South. So that's a one-time, non-recurring cost that's increasing this bid for this year. The next bid, library and classroom technology. This is kind of a hybrid. We've combined a couple of bids to make this new category. And excuse me, as we're seeing more items in this space, classroom technology, so maker station parts, Apple products, calculators, things like that. We now have the opportunity to put those out to bid rather than buy them in one-off situations. So this bid total, excuse me, $46,160. So that is an increase of $19,744 over last year. Now, again, the reason for that is because we are putting more items onto this bid than we have in the past. So we're seeing it just an incremental growth because we're seeing the types of purchases that are coming in, and as we see that there's some commonality, we migrate them over to the bid so that we get more pricing. So what you're seeing is a shift of purchases on the bid increasing, purchases not on the bid decreasing. So that's the mix we want to try to achieve. The last item
Hang on, I
is,
got one question.
Yeah.
Robert, maybe you can answer, maybe you can't. You brought up a prime example, maker carts. I'm happy to buy them. Are we using them in all our schools? I guess you know me and uniformity in our schools. So I'm happy to buy them, but not if we're not using them everywhere. So I don't know if you can answer that.
I can't answer that off the top of my head.
But I'll throw it out there as that's sticky for me.
But not in all the schools yet. What I would say is that each of the elementary schools is embracing the concept of maker spaces a little bit differently. Some are going in the robotics path, some are going in the 3D printing path, some are going in the application development path. And it's really neat because whatever they've chosen in their buildings, the building is trying to take it on with it. So it's really cool. So this is just a typical where we're making, there are enough things being bought that we're making others available. So.
I'll also say that a lot of PTOs are funding things separately, and there are several CREF grants that bring these to schools too. So the funding is coming in different directions.
Bill?
Yes, sir.
Last year when we did the bids for the musicians, it didn't come up to the Tiffany drum level, but it was the pianos. I was wondering, this year I didn't see the bids, or were they posted? I didn't see them on board docs. Or were they on board docs?
They should have been. Forgive me if they weren't. I will make sure that they, that you see them, certainly. But I have certainly the documents. Yeah, so musical instruments. This one, the bid total was $161,104. So I had to do some research as to why that number was so high, because it would not be my expectation that we would buy $160,000 of musical instruments in a given year. So I'm understanding that there is a little bit of some system limitations with how the bid goes out, and some internal business practice that we need to reconcile. So our bidding system, if there is no requested quantity entered in the system, the bid doesn't generate out to the vendors. So for example, if we don't enter a quantity for a guitar, then the vendors will not see guitar on the bid list, so they won't give us a price for that guitar. So the music department has adapted to that by saying that there may be things that they want to order, so they put in a requested quantity so that they can see a price, because it is very common practice when the bids come in for the quantities to be adjusted. So if something comes in a few dollars cheaper than it was before, you might be able to buy more of that, or you might be able to buy something different and fit it within the allocation that you have. So the music department has adjusted their thinking to say, well, let's put a quantity in so that we can see the price in case we want to have an order for that. Now, what I can share is that we have in the budget for next year about $32,000 for musical instruments across the district. So that's the number that we're not going to exceed. That's the budget control. So even though the bid says $161,000, that was really an exercise to get the pricing to come in so that we could see what the options might be. Now, we need to migrate a little bit closer to actual what we're going to actually buy, because it's not, it was very difficult for me to be able to offer you some comparisons around this bid. For example, last year's instrument bid, the award amount was $400,000 because they put in for every item, but we certainly did not spend that much. We spent $38,000. So we need to work with the music department to try to get them a little bit closer aligned to the way some of these other bids are operating, so that we're a little closer to actual, and we can start to develop a history of purchasing.
I personally would love that. We're recognizing you can't, but then we don't have the Tiffany discussions and people losing their minds because it's a $400,000 bid when we're really not going to do that.
So I'm very confident in that the budgetary control exists around this, that even though what the board is approving is that price list. So if any purchases that are made off of that bid list, the board is authorizing and binding the vendor to that particular price. They're not binding to the quantity, they're binding to the vendor to the price.
I don't understand why we couldn't lower the numbers. How do we get the $400,000? Because I would think the more quantity you get, the better rate you can get, and then you only buy one or two. Wouldn't that change the price possibly?
So what happened was that there was a quantity of one entered for every item, so that a price would show up when that there's probably the opposite effect happening, where if you say, I know that I'm probably going to get 5 xylophones, then a vendor can say, okay, I know they're going to order 5 xylophones instead of just one of everything. That's basically just here's our catalog and our price.
So we're approving a price list, basically.
You are, yes.
Okay.
Specific to Council Rock School District.
It's just hard to digest.
And, yeah, no, it's
Yeah,
fine.
right.
No, I understand, it's a price list, and then it's a total of that one item of each item, and they pick and choose, but they stay within our budget.
I think this is the first year where we talked about the physical education budget and we didn't talk about rubber chickens.
What?
If I would have known. I would've
I'll look for
brought
it, I'll look for it when I see the
I'll be
detail.
better prepared next year.
Any other questions?
We just talked
All right. So I believe this is the moment you've all been waiting for, the final budget discussion. So we will be making a recommendation to the board for budget approval on May 30th. However, we have two options to be discussed with you this evening regarding the final budget, and we're looking for some consensus from the board members around which of these options we should prepare for May 30th approval. So let me tell you what's the same about these two options, and then I'll talk to you about what's different. So in both of these options, we are using a total of about $4.2 million of fund balance. Now that's coming out of two places. The first is the Educational Priorities Fund balance, which has been committed by the board for a couple of years. And then the remaining $3.8 million. Although these numbers are not the same, they're ostensibly equal. These funds, this 3.8 million, will come out of our unassigned fund balance, which is basically around the number that we've been using in the last several years' budget of that goal of about a $4 million deficit. We wanted to, I'll explain why we wanted to bring that number in below 4 million as we try to work towards moving away from the deficit budget model. So some history around the Ed Priorities Fund balance. And our recommendation is to use that $400,000 to fund the K-5 math program that's being purchased. And I believe is going to be approved at academic standards next week or later this month. So the history around that committed fund balance was that it was set up as the district was developing its work around the PLCs. And so the funds were allocated to be able to be used for the costs associated with training teachers and professional development around that effort. And now that that effort has taken root, we're at a point now where we have enough money in that fund balance to be able to easily cover the outlay for those funds. So for example, next year's budget includes about $75,000 to continue the PLC work. The committed fund balance that we have is about 2.2. So clearly there's enough funding in there. And I'm also told that funding, that educational priorities funding, was not intended to be permanent. And so here's the caution that I'll offer about using the funds around the K-5 curriculum refreshment. So this particular purchase in this year's budget is non-recurring. So we don't buy K-5 math curriculum every year, and we don't buy it every 2 years. It's on a more of a refreshment cycle. So it's a good number of years we hope to get out of that program. But the idea of refreshing curriculum is recurring. We will, on occasion, have a large expenditure within our budget in order to do another set of curriculum, whether that's science or English language arts. So that will come in cycles. And Dr. Elliott and I are going to sit down, look at her existing 5-year plan, and we're going to evaluate whether the current curriculum budget, the operating budget line item, is sufficient to be able to weather some of these spikes. And what we may try to do is something similar to the debt service budget, where we build in incremental increases so that when the next refresh comes up, which I'm told is in probably 2 years, English language arts, that we'll be able to absorb that within the operating budget and then not have to go back to this Ed Priorities Fund balance. So then that way we have the capacity to absorb the bigger hit. We might have to reduce in some other areas. Some other departments may have to take a year off of something that they wanted to do, defer it, so that we can fit that bigger number into the box. But that's the goal, so that we don't have to come back to this, because we don't want to establish the precedent of using fund balance for something that is recurring, right? So the distinction is that K-5 is non-recurring. K-5 math is non-recurring, but curriculum refreshment is not. Does that make sense to folks? Okay. So, here's what's different now about these two options, and I think it's pretty clear just based on the slide. So option number one does not include the elementary technology specialists. Our plan was that we would migrate those positions to the middle school and high school. Those positions are in the budget. That's a constant in both options. But option one does not include the elementary tech specialists. And as a result, the real estate tax increase necessary to get us where we need to be is 2.18%. So just below the Act 1 index, which is 2.3%. Now, the cost of the elementary tech specialists, the net cost, is about $162,000, which is the difference between that 2.18% and going to the Act 1 index tax increase of 2.3%. So option number two includes those two elementary tech specialists in the budget, but in order to be able to stay within the parameters of that, try to get that $4 million budget deficit with those two categories of fund balance, you have to do a 2.3% tax increase. And you see that there's a slight difference between the revenue amounts and the expenditure amounts. And again, that's that difference in order to accommodate those positions. So this is we are looking for the board's comment after I finish out the next two slides. We're looking for some guidance from the board on which of these two options to bring forward to you on May 30th. So the next two slides just show you how we got to the final numbers on each of those options. So in option one, again, the 2.18% real estate tax increase, there's a reduction in the amount of revenue. Again, the initial budget was built with a 2.3% tax increase, so if we reduce that, we're collecting less revenue. So it's about $189,000. Gets you to that final budget, option one, of $241.95 million. Down the bottom here, so this is where we presented to you last month. We were at 246.26. We can get to 246.15, and that's through some more department reductions. So we've looked at the food service budget. So we have every year an allocation for equipment purchases, and that number was increased this year, thinking that we might have some additional equipment failures, but we've done a reevaluation of that equipment. We've got confirmation from Chartwell's. We should be in good shape with the budget we already had available for equipment. So this is not a full reduction to that line item. It's just bringing us back to where we've been over the last couple of years. So again, this is something that we need to keep an eye on every year because equipment ages, and we need to make sure that it's in working order. But we are in good shape for next year. The business department is going to make a $10,000 reduction in our budget, and then we made 1% reductions to both the building allocation and the athletics budgets. So that's about $28,000 to get us across the finish line there. So option two, what you'll see is that these department reductions here are consistent. And we've got the addition of the 2.0 FTEs, the elementary tech specialists. So you see that number here at 162, right? However, you get an offsetting increase in state share for Social Security and PZ. So when you net those two together, that's how you get to the 162. Okay, so our revenue actually increases because we're paying more expense for the Social Security and the retirement contributions, and then our expenses are also up because of that addition of those 2.0 positions.
I don't want to sound sarcastic, but those tech ed specialists aren't going to be very useful if we keep whammying the technology department there. I see a $600,000 reduction in technology.
Right.
And I think I saw a reduction last year too. Did I or did I not? No?
No, and the reduction that you're seeing there is at the high school level, because we had committed to the 2-to-1 ratio.
Okay.
And some of the initial planning that was going on at the high school level was exceeding that ratio. So Matt, myself,
All right.
a couple of other folks worked with the high school folks to pull that back in.
The initial budget had significantly more money in it because we had anticipated purchasing different types of equipment. And having spent the first few months of this year going through the process, narrowing down and talking with teachers and everything, we didn't need that equipment. We could go with something else. So we're not really cutting the 500,000 now. It's, if we had gone with our original purchases, yes, that, we wouldn't need that money, but since we didn't need to.
Okay. So it's an accounting thing, not really a cut.
From the original budget.
We have, yeah, so as the board knows, we put together a 3-year plan, both in terms of hardware, and the adult support and the threats, the standards that we produced. That 3-year plan with this budget is 100% funded.
Okay, that's perfect.
Nothing taken off that whatsoever.
Then I'm fine.
Robert, I have two questions, but the first one was, we spoke something about having 2 floating positions, and that kind of was there for the elementary tech ed originally, if we needed them, if we didn't need. So I was just wanted to clarify how that fits into this.
Yeah, so what Mr. Hidalgo is talking about are that we have a +2 in the budget for K-6 classroom teachers. So Kristen had asked a question and I replied to the full board earlier today with some information around it. And the bottom line is we just don't know yet. So as we sit here on May 9th or whatever today is, we are down 2.5 elementary positions relative to last year. But 4 weeks ago, we were down 8 relative to last year. And we have about 93 individual K-6 students who have started their application to register, but they haven't finished it yet. So those 93 students aren't showing up anywhere in our numbers. So some of those could be private school students looking for transportation only, but certainly that's probably not the majority of them. So the dust hasn't settled yet. We'll have a better idea before the May 30th vote.
With that thing, okay, good. So we might not even need to put the teachers into the budget.
It's hard to say at this point.
So that's okay. And then the other thing.
What I would say is, for analysis purposes this evening, assume that we're going to need those 2 extra positions.
So whether we want them or not.
So
regardless.
The 2 classroom teacher positions, right? So remember, from a budgetary standpoint, we added 2.0 for K-6 classroom positions. So to put it further in perspective, like I said, we're down 2.5 as of today, but we have 6 sections, like 6 individual grade levels and specific schools that are within 3 students of popping. So we could end up using that +2 without a doubt by the time we get.
But he didn't mean keep it in there whether we need it or not. He said in terms of like, as you're thinking about how you want to approach the budget at this point in time, because we can't commit, we have to assume that we will need those 2 teachers. So that's what we're looking at.
Right, that's what I said. And then the other point was, as far as the PLCs at the elementary, I'm sorry, not PLCs, the tech ed specialists at the elementary school, we saw a drastic increase in usage of technology because of them. So that's great. And they're absolutely 100% effective. Yes. What I wanted to see was if there's a follow-through plan, so to say, that once the teachers are up at this high utilization, are they through either professional development or the PLCs creating game books or guidelines that they can pass on as we get teacher turnaround, so we don't have to have actual, specialists in the classroom as much, but that the teachers are doing it amongst themselves, so we can open up those 2 positions. And then maybe down the road, we'll have maybe 1 district-wide or 2, And the other thing was, I thought the middle schools were, tech eds were moving to the high school next year?
No.
We're adding 2 more.
Next year, we're adding 2 more.
Okay.
So the 2 who were at middle school this year will remain next year. We're adding 2 at the high school.
Which was always the plan.
Which was all right, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Question, 2 questions. Bill, just in case anybody's listening and tuning in later, the difference in the tax rate, we have a dollar figure, let's tell them what they're seeing their tax bill.
Yeah, so it's right around that $160,000 cost of the elementary tech specialist.
No, I know. How's
it going to affect the tax bill?
Oh,
You know what
I don't have that with me tonight. I would prepare it for May 30th.
Okay. Second
But
question.
it's small.
Yes, it would be pretty specific.
It's always the bottom line. Robert, is there a possibility? Is there a possibility that you may need those 2 bodies to fill needs? in terms of regular teachers in a school somewhere and not end up as technology specialists?
It's always a possibility, but
And I
that
think it
would
does
be,
get on Kristen's question.
I think that would be stretching the realm of what's probable to happen. So again,
If you were
right
to
now,
need them, if you were to need them, grab them from this.
we would have to,
Right?
yeah, in that position. If we go, you know, +3 or +4.
I mean, because that number,
In that
that
position,
number
we
that
have
you
to.
stated concerns me. It concerns me at redistricting, we talked about it. You know,
Yeah.
a divorce, something negative in the household, a move, those numbers change overnight.
And, you know, I'll say the same thing that I wrote to you all today. This May is running just like last May did, and the May before that, and the May before that. So there hasn't been any surprises yet. I wasn't surprised to see that we were down 8 a month ago. I didn't even mention that to the board because I knew that it would just cause, you know, some thoughts and ideas that weren't going to play out. This happens every year, and every May from, you know, the final 3 weeks of May, we still see movement. So we're not in an unusual position.
But the other
right
thing
now.
is we've made the decision in recent time to use June 1st as the date to lock in our sections. So,
Yeah, we just did that a couple of years ago.
right, so the reality of having a budget vote literally right on, like, what are the odds that we're gonna pass the budget on the 30th, and then on the 31st, we're gonna get 100 kids to register? It's not gonna happen. So if we can, by the time this comes to us, we'll actually be able to feel comfortable and know exactly where we're at.
Exactly.
Well, my question was gonna be, should we move that date up a little bit so we always know? To May 15th?
Well, I think normally we vote, oh, actually, no, but it's now, we're never one a
Yeah.
month. That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
But actually, next year, we're gonna vote the last, didn't we say that after January, we're gonna move to board meetings the last week of the month, so the month,
We did, but
Oh.
we're getting another update tomorrow.
never mind.
Although the May meeting, so we're gonna stick with the third Thursday, just because a couple of developments since our last board meeting. But the 1 month that we're keeping the board business meeting at the fourth Thursday is May, and it's for this purpose. What is it, 28th, I think, next year, May 28th. So May 28th relative to June 1.
Yeah, I'm just kicking it out there as, you know, this is something, it's a lot like retirement. It's well within our purview to move and
Right.
make it manageable.
Well, and to your point, Mike, we had the conversation as a cabinet this morning, should we move that, the business meeting where the budget is approved into the first week of June?
Mhm.
Because it follows July 1.
Yeah.
And it's problematic for us and.
Okay, right, either way,
But yeah, it's with that same thought in mind. It would be nice to have certainty. When
Yeah,
you-
yeah.
When you actually cast that final budget vote.
Mr. Saddle and Dr. Frazier gave me the time to calculate the difference between the two
You're
options.
on.
$5.18.
Thank you.
For the average.
Chris, thank you.
I and everybody else around the table, I'm sure, was really thrilled to hear Kevin's report about the $500,000 over budget in terms of return on investment, a positive over budget. And you talked about adjusting the budget for the coming year. So
That was done.
that was done. Okay, so these figures reflect.
This figure right here, in fact, we knew at the time the first draft was being prepared that we were in great shape on the revenue budget. So we made the adjustment before we even got to the first draft. So that number already includes that $500,000.
You can't find more money yet, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you,
Nice.
I had to ask,
Thinking
I had
about it.
to ask the question.
It's very nice.
Yeah, but that's accounting for the anticipated return on investment in the new year and also the excess return on investment so far this year.
So when Mr. Reinhardt put this together, he was anticipating, he did not know how we were gonna finish, obviously, through the year. So he made his assumptions based on performance through the first 6 months. And so coincidentally, I would say, he moved it to about 1.75 million. So now remember, we still have.
Smart guy.
He was, is, We still have a $3.8 million deficit that we need to have some budget conservatism built in so that we get that +2 on the revenue side and -2 on the expenditure side so that we don't continue to draw out funds. So that's the other piece of that. So it's a balancing act of how far you escalate that revenue versus if we can work towards a no deficit budgeting model, then it becomes easier to move your numbers closer to where they're actually going to finish.
And that is your intent, I think I heard early on. It may take you a few years, but that is your intent. Okay.
That's great. Thank you for answering my question. And since I have the floor, I'll just express my opinion that I think the 2 tech specialists at the elementary school have been an indisputable success. And I would hate to see those positions go away. So I very much favor trying to retain those positions. And at cost of $160-some thousand, I think that's a good investment in our kids' education.
So I'm going to piggyback on that. I think we all agree, and I would venture to say we were all really impressed with what we saw when we've been updated on the work of the tech specialists, the integration specialists. But looking forward, if I remember correctly, we had the intention of 1 year for those elementary integration specialists.
That's
Matt's
right.
nodding his head. And we saw their great value and extended it to 2 years. And I agree, very happy with the work they've done. And I've compared the report from the previous year to this year to see the increased usage of Chromebooks. It's wonderful work. And the type of meetings they're having with teachers, what they're doing with their time, very valuable. And I just want us to be aware that should we extend them for another year, I believe we're committing ourselves to extending then middle school and high school as well. Or does this look like we're creating positions that will be permanent? Well, we always have them. So I just want us to put that in context, not disagreeing with the value at all, but what does this say to us going forward? What are we
Yeah, what I
committing
can tell you is that from a long-term planning standpoint and a long-term teacher support standpoint, our vision is eventually to expand this role, not by people, but in terms of scope of the job. So we're envisioning a position at the elementary level and at the secondary level, at the supervisory level, Act 93 level, a supervisor of STEAM and innovation. So that T is still there. And so that technology is always going to be a forefront part of what these 2 folks do. But we're doing so much work with STEAM, and it's just getting embedded more and more into the curriculum. The teachers are going to need that support as well. They already do, but I think we're probably a year too soon to move in that direction. So I think that what we'll see over the next 2 to 3 years is an elementary supervisor of STEAM and innovation and a secondary supervisor of STEAM and innovation. So and I would see that elementary position coming in this time next year, next year's budget cycle. The secondary one might be the year after that, or it might be 2 years after that. But I think that we'll be able to analyze that. And because of that point of analysis being out there, not necessarily, as we say here today, need to feel like we're committing to a 3rd year at the middle school.
Okay, that helps me. Thank you.
Good, you're welcome.
And it might be helpful to, since they have data, like to kind of use that initial one as a benchmark and then kind of look at the numbers over time. And obviously at the secondary level to start doing that, just so we can kind of see how it's tracking. And then that will help hopefully to indicate, what direction to go in.
Absolutely.
So a lot of the data points that you track, I don't know that it fully captures the full extent of what the value is, because the usage is up, great, that's what we want. These number of incidents are up, but it's not as simple as like saying, these tech specialists have taught these teachers how to do X, Y, and Z, and now they're gonna go with it. What they're bringing, is keeping it fresh, it's keeping it innovative, it's, supporting them in ways that I don't know that the teachers, it could be that they'd be like, sort of like at a plateau. They're up there, and this is what they can repeat time and time again. But the specialists and that focus, where someone is truly dedicated to that, helps to bring it, raise it to a different level that is critically important in the world we're in.
Yeah,
So,
and to give an example of that, you're absolutely right. When you walk into a classroom with the students, a classroom full of students using Chromebooks, just the concept of active student engagement, seeing every single student, minds on, just engaging, full throttle, it's phenomenal to see.
It
And
is
it's hard to replicate that, many other ways. So you can't record that, you can't chart that, you can't line graph that over time, but that impact that it's having on the students from a 21st century preparedness standpoint, from just overall engagement with the content is awesome. It's awesome to see. And that goes beyond these data points.
I have a quick question. So Bill, in the budget form presentation that you put together, there was a slide that talked about like tax levels like over time.
Yes.
And increases. And so over the last like few years, you like speak to that, just so that if maybe someone from the public wanted to be aware of like where we have been in the last few years.
So in the short term, the board has been, the last 3 years, the board has approved tax increases right at the Act 1 index. But that graph also showed, going back to, I believe it was maybe 2009-10 or 2010-11, there's a history, of the board being at or below the Act 1 index. In all those years that I showed, it was at least 10 years. And either of these two options would continue that trend.
And I can put some more specific numbers to that for the community's sake. Before these 3 years, the 5 years prior, the total tax increase was 44% of the Act 1 index. If you average it out over those 5 years, and in the 2 most recent years before we started this three-year run that we're on, it was at 21%. So of the available Act 1 money that was available, 21% of it was taken.
So we didn't increase taxes 44%.
No,
We used 44% of the available Act 1. Right, so that's right. Make sure somebody was listening.
Yeah, I have those numbers, and there was a year shortly before I joined the board, it would have been 5 or 6 years ago, where there was a 0% tax increase. And as a result, we ended up having to cut 42 positions my first year on the board. And I don't want to see us get in that place again.
I would like to jump back to the tech coordinators for next year. We'll have, if we choose to keep the elementary coordinators, we'll have 6. And then the idea, and I do believe that we should, once we hit that goal and we can get the teachers to start collaborating and sharing through those communities, that we're going to reduce or consolidate or expand the roles, but maybe not have 6. But you were saying maybe you guys are talking about 2 supervisors at 2 different levels. Exactly. Great.
Well,
I'm sure I understood that.
I have not been bashful about being a cheerleader for these positions, and obviously I support them. I will, in terms of freshening up the thing, I look back, because I'm seeing it now, even when my children were in elementary school, they all did a 3D bug model. That's great. And that happens every year. You can't do that with technology. You can't just rubber stamp it. And if we don't have these helpers available, it's going to tail. It's going to plummet because nobody's freshening these things.
Technology tends to evolve.
Yeah, it does. And I actually have been in the classroom where these specialists have walked in, and Robert's right. It's more than, especially the younger kids, it's more than a teacher can handle. A lot of times they've got volunteers it's 5, 6 people's jobs to get, everybody logged in and everyone, secure. And so I'll join Ed and say I'm an option 2 fan.
I agree, and if I could just follow up, Joe, with what you had said about reaching a goal in this area, I don't think we've reached the goal. It's a continuous, and that's why I'm happy to hear what are we thinking about going forward, and I feel comfortable with option 2 for the budget, and very much in favor.
I was going to say 2, because I'm okay with option 2, but I thought maybe you could actually adjust from technology to a full broad STEAM coordinators as we ramp up that whole broader scope. So we may actually need 2 at the elementary schools to get the hands-on that he's talking about. So we may adapt those roles and not just go right to supervisors that draw, because you need that hand-on. You need the hands-on. Again, like we do with technology, it's a little bit even harder with Steve, you know? When you have the modeling and everything.
It will both.
Yeah.
I like the way you asked the question.
I would like to give some direction so that Bill can prepare the appropriate budget. So I'm hearing so far 4 people in favor of option 2. Ed, do you?
Oh, I haven't commented.
I know, so that's what I'm asking.
Well, I think if we recall, a couple months ago, the other hat that I wear, our PTO put together a $18,000 donation in terms of Chromebooks. Our school alone in Holland, PTO alone has purchased, tens of thousands of dollars, much like a lot of PTOs around the district. I was never jumped into the pool. We didn't think it was important. My biggest fear, as president, continues to be my concern, is they end up in closets. And we've seen this happen before, where technology ends up in a closet because there's not enough support for the teachers. I don't think we're going that direction. I think the direction is this evolves. And I think in our time on this board, whether it's a year, 2 years, 4 years down the road, this job classification would be vastly different than it is what we're talking about today. I think we're short-sighted if we put a time period or time stamp on these positions. I mean, these people have done a wonderful job for these kids, and I think, and more importantly, they've done a great job for the educators. I don't know if we would be here today without them. And to me, that's the telltale sign that it's money well spent. And at $5 and 18 cents, I don't know any parent out there that would argue that. Because the one thing our responsibility is to the budget and to ensure our students are being properly educated. And I'm a huge proponent of this. Huge proponent of this.
Kristen,
Well said.
I'm just trying to poll the board to see
Yeah,
about which budget to prepare.
Yeah, I mean, I think the tech specialists, they've been very positive. The results are great. So I'm supportive of doing option 2. I mean, it'd be great if we had, a crystal ball, or at least a sense of what was going to happen. But, I think as we get closer, if we can get an update, but yeah, I think that it's an important part of that kind of movement forward with our curriculum and technology and direction for Council Rock.
And I agree. I strongly support option 2. I mean, it's worth noting that from even prior to the preliminary budget talks, I mean, the conversation at the board table about these positions existed before we even knew what the budget was going to look like and where this was headed and everything. So I think it's really clear that it's a priority. And so I think you can move forward knowing that option 2 is the one that you should be presenting 3 weeks from now.
Thank you for the guidance.
Any other comments?
I think they knew that's where we're headed, but.
We need the confirmation. Is there any public comment
To this,
on
Or at all.
this or at all?
you have all comments.
I had emailed the board.
You have a secret.
Oh, Renee Kilgara, I'm sorry. I emailed everybody last week about the graduation gowns. I did get responses today when I emailed again. I just hope that this is, I have a junior, so this issue does impact me next year. It impacts my daughter, her friends, and I hope that they will have some input into any decision and that it will be made, it will be discussed in public. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Then we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.